So this third lecture segment on climate change deals with climate science, climate change science, and public understanding. I think you all are aware that there are great controversies over whether how significant the climate change risk is, and a lot of it is debated about over what the science says or doesn't say. So we want to explore this a little bit because not only is it useful for this quintessential issue, but also has some broader implications towards, as scientists, communicating our understanding to influence public policy. So I'm going to give you a few insights in terms of public perception. And the one that I'm particularly fond of is this work done by Yale University and James Mason University, George Mason University, on this project called Six Americas. And the premise and why this is interesting is that it doesn't basically just ask yes or no questions and show those data, but it digs a little bit more deeply in terms of the multiple responses that the public would give in a poll, and to characterize what their motivations and belief systems are. So these analysts have basically looked at this and come up with a way to group the American public into one of six categories, from alarmed, concerned, cautious, disengaged, doubtful, or dismissive. So those that are alarmed basically are all in. They already know that there's a problem. They're pretty convinced it is. They're ready to take action, and they're motivated. Concerned are similarly much aware, so although sometimes they don't know as much as you might think, but they're a little bit confused about exactly what the risks are and what needs to be done. Cautious are those folks who were basically confused, if you will, hearing mixed messages, a little bit skeptical. Disengaged, or people are just not paying attention much at all. And then these two groups over here, these are the folks who were, you probably know some of them, who basically say, I don't see the evidence. I'm not convinced. I think it's overblown. And then there's a certain segment that basically are hardcore that would probably be in deep denial for a variety of reasons, mostly philosophical about the role of government, as well as the lack of awareness of the knowledge that we have. So these analysts have actually tracked these over the years and see how they respond in different ways to new information and how their views change over time. You can see here just as an illustration of the people who might be associated with those. I like to call this guy like my brother because he's kind of a doubtful skeptic, although he says he's an engineer and he's open and willing to discuss the evidence. But he's probably in this category. So one of the things that these analysts come up with in terms of what in their surveys is that as scientists communicate this information, we need to think of clear, simple messages that reinforce basic information. Basically, what they find out is that scientists are actually trusted in many respects. So we're in a unique position to be able to communicate this understanding. But we need to do it in a way that gets to them. We need to make it personal. Bring examples that are in their lives rather than just talking about polar bears and things of that sort. And the messages need to be repeated often by respected and trusted messengers like scientists. So this same group has done recently produced some really spectacularly interesting maps to show how the beliefs about climate change are distributed over the nation. Let me just say, a few years ago, the same group did a parallel survey to their national surveys in Maryland. And so in Maryland, you'd find more people than the national average in these categories and fewer people in these categories. And that actually is a trend that you see even on the Eastern Shore, for example, where there are a lot of conservative folks of Southern Maryland, Western Maryland, We have generally, even in those areas, fewer people who are, percentage of the people are truly dismissive or doubtful. But here you see, in terms of the national trends, and this is a wonderful website. You should go and check it out because you can adjust it by counties, as in this case, or congressional districts and the like. And you can see they have the survey data, the data distributed by these small subunits. And the interesting thing here is that a substantial majority, something like 70% of the American public, agree that climate change, believe that climate change is happening. They actually see in their lifetimes, they see clear signs of it. There's a certain group that's just unknown, uncertain, and then it's only 12% who basically say, no, it's not happening at all. And that is obviously stronger in some areas than in others, but even across the nation, only few counties where there's a plurality of individuals who basically think that it's not happening. Now, if we go to this other survey question, though, it's a very interesting result. You notice how much bluer this map is. This means that we have less than 50% of the respondents who think that most scientists think that global warming is happening. So even though they think it's happening, they are still confused. They think that it's maybe not happening. In fact, a substantial amount, almost half, accept that scientists think it's global warming is happening. But about 28% say, there's a lot of disagreement. There's no common view among scientists, which shows that we have a problem of communication to the public, and that there's some disinformation as well about the lack of scientific consensus. If we look at another question, you can go and look at all of these questions and adjust the maps for yourselves and see how it turns out. But I just picked these because they were interesting. Here's the question: do you believe that global warming is mostly caused by human activities? And it's only in the Northeast and a few heavily populated areas, South Florida, South Texas, West Coast, where most people think that it is. Overall, about 53%. But that a sizable number, about a third, basically say, no, I think it's mostly natural causes. That's the point of that op-ed that I wrote, and this is the point that the administrator of EPA is making, that we're not sure that it's human caused. There may be other factors. Well, he's part of this 32% group, ostensibly. But if we then go and ask them, are they willing to support regulating carbon dioxide as a pollutant, something that the present administration wants to turn back, the clean power rule that the Obama administration put in to regulate CO2 emissions under the Clean Air Act, a substantial majority, 75% of people overall, even across the country, were willing to do that. So even though there is some skepticism about whether it's all human caused, they're still prepared to take some action, at least on the survey, that the emissions should be regulated, whether it's by abundance of precaution or whether they're confused by the word pollutant and associate negative things for it. Very interesting set of survey data. So the reality is, and you've probably heard about this, that there have actually been several studies that have been done of surveys of scientists and of looking at the literature, published literature on climate change, to basically see where those papers come down. And what these studies basically have shown, that of the people who are legitimately engaged in climate science, that something in the order of 97%, some cases slightly less, some cases even more, of these experts believe, or not believe, but basically they're convinced by the evidence that the world is warming and that it's largely human caused. So this is this vast consensus that the other figure showed was not understood by the public. In fact, you can see it here, where 97% of the climate scientists would agree with anthropogenic global warming, whereas only about 55% of the public think that there is an active, raging scientific debate and the science is not settled or we don't know yet. Only 45% of the U.S. citizens, adults, seem to understand this. So one of the things we have to do a better job of as we communicate with the public on the science behind climate change is the words we use. And this is this is in the reading, this paper, and I urge you to read it because it talks about a number of terms that is used in climate change science that have in the public market have very different meaning. Just one, for example, is an aerosol. You know, folks think of things coming out of spray cans from aerosols. One of them is that Susan Hassel makes a point of is error. You know, we think the error, you know, statistical error, and where the public thinks that means you made a mistake. The one, though, that I think is most interesting to look at, and we have to be careful with, is this term uncertainty. Because when we use it as scientists, we often refer to it as kind of a range. You know, we have confidence limits or probability distribution, and then we can talk about the uncertainty within that range. But when the public hears it, it means you don't know, ignorance. So here, as we give a talk, scientists, because this is what we live and breathe, this is what drives science's uncertainties, the interest in resolving them, will drop that uncertainty bomb. And what this guy hearing us hears, she just doesn't have a clue about what's going to happen. So that's just an example about how we need to use a language. And here's a quote from Al Gore in his book he wrote back when he was still a senator, Earth in the Balance, first raising the political public level of climate change. But there's a difference between scientific uncertainty and political uncertainty. While science thrives on the unknown, politics is often paralyzed by it. I won't go into this, but basically, even within science and technical jargon, there's a variety of meanings of the term uncertainty, from statistical variability or heterogeneity, the model or parameter uncertainty that are used that propagate through models, as well as deep uncertainty about we don't even know the processes that are underpinning the things that we're trying to model. So we have to be careful about using that term, among others. So here's an example of what I think we mean. These are, again, from the IPCC. What we saw before was the future up till 2100. These actually show you the projections for the next 300 years, basically, to 2300, with those same RCP scenarios. So this shows you that we could level temperature off, and actually, if we keep the CO2 concentrations or greenhouse gas concentrations going down, the temperature will actually begin to cool back down. Not for a long time, until where we were, and you can see the four scenarios here. So you can see, most particularly in the out years, that the largest contributor to our uncertainty about these models isn't the models themselves, but basically what humankind is going to do. That the future temperature is largely determined by the amount of emissions that we describe. So if anyone asks you, what's the temperature going to be like? You don't say, well, we don't know, it's uncertain. You say, well, it depends, first of all, on what we do with respect to emissions. And indeed, there's a range for each, but the primary contributor to this variation and these differences, a range of possible futures, is the driver, is the greenhouse gas emissions, rather than uncertainty related to our lack of knowledge or statistical variability. So think about the tools that we can bring to bear on effective communication of climate science. Some of these are actually relevant to anything else we want to communicate. I won't go into this in great depth. This is from a little piece that was in The Guardian. The web link is here. But you can see this is this one idea. Be careful about using uncertainty. Talk about risk. Talk about range. Things of that sort. and also some of the other things that we've talked about for bringing it home on a personal level to help them understand the risks that we're talking about that are important to them. In thinking about climate change, it's really often not the question of if, but when, um, and um, and the way to communicate through images and stories rather than through a lot of detailed words and stilted jargon. Make it a human story, have a conversation, not an argument. So I've got the link here, and I really would urge you to go and watch this video, watch this TED Talk. It's maybe 20 minutes length by Susan Hassel, who is really experienced in this issue of communicating climate change. That list and that paper that you have and that list of words is from her work, and you can see how she explains it to a general audience, and maybe get some tips of your communication skills from Susan. One of them I think is kind of funny, that she talks about scientists talk about error bars, and here from the video is where all scientists should retire to the error bar. In this day and age, we've got a lot of information that you can get about climate change in particular. It's such a hot topic, more ways than one, but and politically charged topic, and a topic where there's so much new information coming out on a daily basis. How do you keep abreast of it all? Well, this shows you 3 different websites from range quite a bit. This is one that I often go to because it's a good source of debunking a lot of stuff you might hear, criticisms you might hear, and it's got a huge information base behind it. This is called Skeptical Science. If you haven't been there before, I would urge you to do it, because one of the things it has here is the common myths. The climate's changed before. It's the sun. It's not going to be bad. And there's no consensus. All of those things. You can click on any one of those and go to the factual information, a short version, more public version, or you can dig deeper and it gives you a lot of back to the original papers and so on to support it. This is for example, where I got this history of climate science in the earlier presentation. Very, very good and rich source. Climate Central is an organization of people trying to put factual information out. It's not such an aggressive group to work on debunking things, but it's a very good source of new information and practical things. For example, their interactive maps where you can look at sea level rise where you live or in the city you may be familiar with and what it means. And then on the other extreme, this is What's Up With That, which is by a guy named Watt, and he is a leading climate change denier. And so anything that comes out about the science and so on, he's quick to post some things on it that show you, well, it doesn't mean anything or it's not true. You should have a look at it, because I think it's a good helps you understand how these people think and how they construct information. They sometimes dig very deeply in the papers and present the material, but in a way that tries to make their point rather than necessarily the point the authors made. So just this coming week on Wednesday, there's going to be a hearing of the House of Representatives Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. Now, it's chaired by a gentleman by the name of Lamar Smith, a Republican from Texas, who's a deep climate change denier. And so he has got a panel on this hearing, which is on the topic of climate science assumptions, policy implications, and the scientific method. Implicit in this, he's going to criticize climate scientists for not using, quote, the scientific method. So we'll see how it goes. There's a nice little piece summarizing this, the actors who will be in this on the Science Magazine online news article, and he's got a lineup. Now, the way this works is that they're in the majority, so they get the majority of the witnesses. So they've got Judith Curry, John Christie, and our good old friend Roger Pielke. You remember from the Honest Broker days. These 3 are somewhat, he's not a skeptic per se, but basically he's saying, you really can't do anything about it that people don't want to do, and there are other risks caused by human activities. So he just kind of clouds things up a bit. These two guys are hard over critics of the scientific consensus and of data sets and so on. And here's our hero, Michael Mann of the hockey stick fame. You might be familiar with, person who was persecuted with respect to the so-called ClimateGate scandal, and actually investigated by the former Attorney General, Republican Attorney General of Virginia, and so on. He's now become a very aggressive dependent. So he's going to have to hold fort with these three other. And so we will, if you have time, and you can go online and look it up through the website and probably find it live, or it will be available, I'm quite sure, on a video that you might want to look at to see how these debates play out.